Bitcoin, Ripple, and Dogecoin. What do all of these have in common? Well, despite being the top 10 crypto by market cap, these digital assets are actually not directly compatible in the DeFi ecosystem. And this is why Flare is solving this opportunity gap by enabling BTC, XRP, and Doge to interact with smart contracts, which means unlocking huge liquidity across multi-trillion-dollar markets and DeFi. Today, we'll dive into how Flare is doing that with Hugo Fillion, who's the co-founder and CEO of Flare, the blockchain for data. How are you doing, Hugo?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great too. Really excited to have you on and go through some of what you're doing at Flare and then what's coming next as well. So just to let you know, my name is Hikaru Kasai. I am the editor at Tokenpost. So we'll dive into more about your background and what inspired you to supercharge at Flare. And then I'll dive more into how, as the layer 1 and layer 2 ecosystem matures, why we actually need Flare to connect that data across different networks. And then lastly, what we can expect for Flare in 2025. Yeah, so let's get started. Can you share more about your technical background and how that influenced Flare's vision to connect everything, quote unquote?
Sure. So my background, I was a commodity derivatives trader at several hedge funds in London. And I did that for 7 years after university. I ended up becoming a portfolio manager and essentially decided I wanted to leave that. My background was fairly quantitative in terms of I focused a lot on quantitative models. And I went to study machine learning at UCL in London as a master's. And that's where I met my co-founders of Flare, of which our CTO, Dr. Nari Usha, was a postdoctoral researcher at UCL at the time.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, definitely lots of education to get to where you are today and make it happen.
And so I think, the reasoning behind, why we looked at what we looked at in terms of building Flare is that there is a big gap in the market where you have these very large value sources such as Bitcoin, Doge, XRP, and, they're not widely used in DeFi. Even if you look at Bitcoin today, really, you have wrapped Bitcoin, which is through custody service, of which there's a little bit of controversy about. But it's a very small amount of Bitcoin that is actually wrapped. And that's because, people didn't get into Bitcoin in order to then place their tokens in custody. It's antithetical to the movement that Bitcoin represents. You can probably say much the same about XRP and Doge. And so we think that there has to be a truly trustless way to bring those tokens into the DeFi ecosystem, and that's what we're building at Flare. We're very focused on essentially providing DeFi, providing services around those particular tokens, and then interacting with other networks with regards to data.
Awesome. Okay. So let's actually dive more into that. If you can elaborate, right? How Flare exactly enables these developers and users to unlock additional utility and value from BTC, XRP, Doge, right, into smart contract ecosystems. How does it exactly work?
Absolutely. So Flare is a layer 1 EVM chain based on a fork of Avalanche. We have built into the chain a set of oracles, two oracles which do essentially three things. So instead of those oracles being external to the chain and essentially not secured in the same way that a blockchain is secured, on Flare, we are securing those oracles in the same way that sort of proof of stake works, i.e. you stake to a data provider, that provider provides data collectively with other data providers. So on Flare, we have two types of oracle. One for prices called the Flare Time Series Oracle that can handle up to 1,000 prices updated every single block, which is roughly 1.8 seconds. And what we call the Flare Data Connector, which is for getting proofs from Web 2 and Web 3 onto Flare. So once you've got price and you've got state from other blockchains, you are able to do things that you couldn't do before. So we're building a bridge effectively, which this interview will go out in a couple of days or maybe a week. But today, in a couple of hours, we will be launching that bridge on our canary net called Songbird for starting with FXRP. So what we call, that's the XRP bridge. So FXRP being the Flare version of XRP. And that bridge is unlike any other bridge. It is collateralized with stablecoins and the native token in Songbird on Songbird and Flare on Flare. And the aspect of having collateral means that you don't have to trust the system. You don't have to trust who you're bridging with, because when there's when there's a fault, you get paid out in that collateral, meaning you don't get a value loss. And it's essentially a bridge as a DeFi protocol. And we think that makes quite a lot of sense relative to sort of multi-sig type protocols. So this then allows you to bring XRP, Doge, Bitcoin onto chain, and then use that in Flare's DeFi ecosystem, which is sort of advancing quite rapidly. So for the last couple of months, that ecosystem has gone from essentially 0 TVL to about 80, 90 million of total TVL. You won't see that on DeFi Llama because they don't count real world assets. So a large chunk of that TVL is in real world assets. But I think the DeFi Llama amount of TVL is roughly about 33 million. So that's been extremely good. And we think that by enabling bridging for these assets, enabling people to put those assets to work to earn yield in DeFi on Flare, that will be a very interesting use case and liberate those assets and give people the ability to hodl whilst earning yield.
Exactly, yeah. Because there's many Dogecoin holders out there, right? And then I'm pretty sure they're very happy because Elon Musk tweeted, right? And it keeps going up. So they're willing to take more risk, do something more with it, in the broader ecosystem. So one thing is that the concept of FAsset, I think is very important for our ecosystem. So let's say me as a Dogecoin holder, right? I bridge it into Flare, and now I get an FAsset. What can I do from there?
So you can LP it in a DEX protocol. You can borrow against it or lend it in a lending protocol. You can use it as collateral in a perps protocol. You can make payments with it as you could on Doge, but you can do that on Flare. You can buy NFTs with it. There's quite a lot of, various things. But one of the things that people want to be able to do, I think, is they want to be able to take their Doge, their XRP, their Bitcoin, and they want to be able to borrow against it in order to give themselves some leverage. That's one of the key things that people want. And then, one of my projects, and we can come on to this in more detail, is I want to do staking, as in for XRP, for Doge, for Bitcoin, later next year, around essentially using those assets to secure third-party services, so that you can stake on your native chain, on XRP, on Doge, or Bitcoin, but you can receive the liquid staking token on Flare. I actually have a request for proposal, which has a very large grant attached out, using Flare's technology in order to be able to create a staking platform.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think liquid staking has always been a really big opportunity for Ethereum. Lido has proven it. But when it comes to other chains or assets, it's always a little bit just scratching the surface. So if you can expand more into that, right? How is your project doing this and allowing more yields to be generated from these king assets?
So the concept of that platform is very simple. It should harness Flare's native protocols. So the Flare data connector allows for you to prove something from an external system that is deterministic onto Flare. So if you think about something like EigenLayer, what they're doing is they're essentially allowing staking and then getting information from the services, the AVSs that are using that value as stake. Flare allows you to do a similar thing. The information you need from the AVSs is needed in order to be able to slash stake when essentially a provider of services in that verified service goes wrong. And ultimately, this then allows Flare's protocols, both the price protocol and the FTC, to be used to create a staking platform, plus a third ingredient, which we're very interested in, which is confidential compute, which will allow people to stake directly on Bitcoin, on XRP, on Doge.
Interesting. Okay, so it's still utilizing the native security of each of the chains, for example, like Bitcoin's blockchain and so forth, and it doesn't necessarily compromise the security of that when you do it.
So you wouldn't be transferring your funds to Flare. You would be locking your funds effectively on the underlying chain. with Flare being able to administer the platform itself, essentially being able to administer slashing on those funds on the underlying chain.
Interesting. Okay. And can you share more examples about how other ecosystem apps on Flare or even your strategic partners are leveraging the Flare's, technology?
Absolutely. So, we have a number of dexes on Flare. The largest dex is called Spark Dex. And then we have Enosis, Blaze Swap. We have a lending protocol called Kinetic. Spark Dex also just launched a Perps Dex. And so things like Kinetic and Spark Dex are taking advantage of Flare's native oracle. So they don't have to pay to use an external oracle. They get the data on Flare. We have a group called Syndric who are building something called XDeFi, which is a fully regulated futures platform on chain. And they're starting with gold and silver, I believe. And ultimately, again, using the data that Flare proves onto the network from the price data protocol called the FTSO, the Flare Data Connector.
Gotcha. Okay. And, this year has definitely been the year for like Solana, Sui, and many other notable chains. So how do you prioritize which, chains to bring into the Flare ecosystem as they grow?
So we're sort of connected in the middle between the Ethereum world through the Stargate Bridge, which is where things like wrapped USDT and wrapped USDC come in on Flare. And then we're very focused, as I said, on Bitcoin, XRP, and Doge, and bringing those to smart contracts. We think that that's ultimately, if you look at those ecosystems, there are projects that are trying to bring, let's say, Doge to smart contracts by itself, or XRP to smart contracts by itself. We think there's far greater value proposition in bringing all three to the same place to create a liquidity hub for, of DeFi around sort of the major asset classes, which, essentially Bitcoin, XRP, they're both in the top three of the major asset classes, and of course the major stables from Ethereum. So we think that's a highly compelling proposition.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that because one thing that we're still struggling to solve as an industry is a fragmentation. And as more bridges come up, more chains, that only grows. So we do need a hub, right, to just connect.
I understand why people want to do specific projects for specific chains, like Bitcoin L2s. But to me, I think it's far more interesting to do, a project that works with as many of those high value, no smart contract tokens as possible. That is sort of my thesis on where this industry should go.
Interesting. Okay, great. I do want to shift our gears a little bit and go into more of a fun question. And this doesn't have to be within only the Flare ecosystem, but just crypto in general. What are some of your favorite DeFi projects or even meme coins?
So meme coins are very simple. Doge, right?
Yeah.
That we're building a fully trustless, collateralized bridge for Doge. We're not building it for other meme coins at the moment. But I think in terms of, my favorite DeFi projects, obviously, the ones on Flare are fantastic. There was one I haven't mentioned so far, which is called Rain, which is actually a really interesting way of building a DEX. It is, it's unlike the traditional Uniswap V2, V3 method, and it's much more like a centralized exchange, but fully on a blockchain. And it has a very simple language called Rainlang that allows you to programmatically set your buy levels, your sell levels, and it uses Flare's data protocols to trigger those sales or purchases, so you can have a lot more granular control than you can on a DEX. So I think, in terms of, DeFi apps that I really like, I like that as a way to make the experience of trading on a chain much, much more user-friendly. I think it's early days for Rain, but, I think people will cotton on to them eventually. Otherwise, I think Perps protocols are really interesting. And I think, well, I would call them gambling protocols, but other people call them prediction markets. Effectively, I think, that is a fantastic use case for blockchain. There's a number of those protocols being built on Flare currently. So, I look forward to them coming to market.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of, I would say, sophisticated DeFi platforms that's making the UI UX very easy, maybe a hit for retail, right? As we enter a new bull market, and then a more Web 2 people come into the crowd. So very excited for
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, you want if you look at the size of centralized exchanges, they're vast. You want and one of the reasons why DEXs, why DEXs haven't fully displaced centralized exchanges, one of the reasons, not all of the reasons, but is that the UI and UX is very poor.
It is. There's still so much to improve, but we come a long way in the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's actually kind of look into the future, because I think everyone is looking forward to 2025, with Trump taking over, US actually becoming more crypto friendly, right? Probably the biggest altcoin season, we have yet to see, and Bitcoin continuing to make new all-time highs. So the question is, what can builders, developers, and even users expect from Flare in 2025?
Okay, so there's things that I'm really interested in. We have this strong, relatively nascent DeFi ecosystem. Today, we're launching on Songbird the first FAsset bridge for XRP. So we'll then be launching FDoge and then FBitcoin. Those are meant to be relatively short tests, and we're hoping to be able to launch those protocols on Flare proper in Q1, that kind of time. And so for me, it's about, there's a lot of thinking and a lot of, work around getting those tokens into the ecosystem, making sure that they're adopted, making sure that, markets are built around XRP, Doge, and Bitcoin. So that's going to be, a big focus of mine for 2025. And then the native staking with liquid token issuance on Flare. So staking on Bitcoin, as in not having to bridge, but you can stake on Bitcoin, you can stake on XRP, you can stake on Doge, and then get a liquid token out on Flare, which you can borrow against, or, restake even. That is probably, one of the most exciting things that I'm interested in for 2025. And as I said, I've put out an RFP for that. You can find that on Flare's website. I'm personally doing a grant of 500K, and I'm sure the Flare Foundation would support the relevant team who wins that grant as well. But that's a personal grant from me, because I think it's such a useful area and an extremely interesting product. And then, I'm looking forward to getting Flare's data protocols accessible on other networks. There's no reason that there should only be one or two major oracles that are both fairly centralized. Flare is an extremely decentralized oracle. At the moment, you can only really access it on Flare. So being able to get that data very quickly onto other networks is a goal. And then lastly, we have a big theme in 2025 around adding compute, off-chain confidential compute through trusted execution environments on Flare, so that you can build much more performant applications with much better UIs. To give you a really simple example, there's no on-chain DEX that currently gives rebates for volume, right? So if you're a huge trader, you pay the same fee as a small trader. In order to make that really work, you need to have a way to compute the address and the amount of volume they've done. Now, you could do that off-chain and have a governance procedure, but it's kind of clunky, messy, not trustless. Or you can do that with confidential compute off-chain. It doesn't have, as strong security guarantees as a blockchain itself, but certainly has stronger security guarantees than a multisig. And so this off-chain confidential compute through trusted execution environments, if you structure it well, it gives you the ability to add a lot more functionality and a lot more user friendliness to applications. So, that's just one simple example, rebates for volume. And that should be a standard thing in a DEX because it's a standard thing in a CEX.
Okay. No, that's quite unique because most blockchains, store data, right, verify that, but they rely on third-party applications to build analytics or whatever compute on top. But having that built into Flare, because I think can make it a lot more accessible for developers to take advantage of these things that they actually need, right, in real life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great, great. So let's say I'm part of the Flare community member. I'm really excited about all these things. How can I actively get involved?
You can, if you're part of the Flare community already, you can bridge stables from Ethereum to Flare to take part in the DeFi ecosystem. You could delegate your Flare token to a data provider. You should already be doing that. Or you could stake to a data provider. So we have two systems, a delegation system on the C chain and a staking system on the P chain. Slightly different. One is to secure the validator itself and one is to secure the data. But essentially the data provider is also the validator. So you can do that. You can play with perps dexes, you can play with, rain dex, you can play with all the various dexes that are on Flare. You can borrow, you can lend your dollars that you've bridged from Stargate onto Flare in a lending protocol. And very soon, in fact, later today at least, if you are using Songbird, which is our Canary network, you'll be able to bridge XRP and actually use it in DeFi.
Okay, so yeah, so many things that people can start doing with. Great. And lastly, because this is Tokenpost, right? Crypto has been extremely hot in Korea and lots of activity coming here. So if you had to give one takeaway, right, for our Korean audience, what is something that you would like to share?
I think specifically for the Korean audience is that, Flare has traditionally been, fairly US, Europe centric. We have built a small team in Korea now. And so look out for events. Look out for, Flare things that are happening in Seoul, because I think there'll be a fair few exciting things in 2025.
Awesome. I really look forward to it as well. Great. So thank you so much, Hugo. I know we only just touched the nick of everything that you guys are doing, but it's really about execution and what users and developers will be able to do, right, in 2025. So please, join the Flare community. Keep an eye out for what they're doing and announcements, and we go from there. It's Web3.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Hugo. See you next time.
Thanks. See you next time.